Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we have entered day 203 of the ongoing Russia-Ukrainian war, and I think we're all trying to sit back and trying to look at just what happened in the Ukrainian offensive operation near Kharkov, to the east of Kharkov, and just ask ourselves what's next. Do Ukrainian forces cross the Oskil River and continue the attack down the main P7 highway and look to encircle Russian forces near Severodonetsk and Lysychansk? We are seeing now heavy fighting taking place just on the outskirts of Lysychansk, and that fighting continues. The Ukrainian operation further towards Severodonetsk and near Horlovivka did not result in the same success that Ukrainian forces saw in its operation near Kharkov. Now, as we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, how did this happen? Did Russia come into this ready to fight a war, or were they here to conduct a quote-unquote special military operation? Well, I can tell you with absolute certainty, the Ukrainians, once the Russians moved into Ukraine, saw this as a war and fully mobilized. On the other hand, on the Russian side, as Russian forces crossed into Ukraine, we have many anecdotal reports from some Russian units that they didn't even realize that they were going to war. And you can discount some of those reports, but at the same time, we do know some of those reports were true, and they definitely exist. Obviously, some of the Russian Spetsnaz and air mobile forces that landed near Hostomel in the early stages of this conflict knew that they were attacking Ukraine. But some of these other units, some of these larger mechanized formations that rolled into Ukraine and found a very, very stiff resistance early on against Ukrainian forces, some of those forces, again, simply were not aware that they were rolling into Ukraine to conduct military operations, to go to war. Now, if you have one side, the Ukrainians, fully understanding and fully bought in that they are in a war for survival or perceived survival, and they are fully vested in the fight, and then you have another side, the Russian side, which you have this special operation that was announced, and I don't know what was going through the minds of Shoigu and other members of the Russian general staff. I don't know what kind of input was given, what kind of counsel was given to Vladimir Putin in the run-up to the conflict. But calling it a special military operation and kind of toned down what you perceive and you want the public at large in Russia to perceive in terms of what is happening versus what the Ukrainians are seeing is happening and again fully mobilizing. So again, when you have one side, the Ukrainians fully mobilizing and preparing for war and acknowledging a war, and then you have the other side not so much, calling it a special military operation, and even to the extent where individuals could be persecuted if they in fact call it a war, is could be disheartening. And you're kind of really going into this again, as I talked about Russia entering this with one hand tied behind its back. So do we have a case where the political apparatus inside of Russia is handicapping the Russian military? Was the Russian military handicapped going into this operation from the get-go? And I would have to say it probably was. What I'd like to do, just real quick, is, I think some of you may have heard this speech before, and some of you may not have heard this speech, but I think it's very, very important to listen to this speech. And what this speech is General Eisenhower's speech to U.S. forces before the D-Day landings. And I think it's important to understand that the Allied armies were very, very well aware that they were in a war and what was getting ready to happen. And I have to question, again, this is where politicians can get in the way of warfighters in terms of properly being able to prosecute a military campaign. So let's listen to this speech and just let's ask ourselves, do you think the Russians heard something like this before entering Ukraine? Here we go.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
All right, well, there you have it. That was Eisenhower's speech to U.S. forces, Allied forces, before the D-Day landings, the Allied invasion of Western Europe. And so I guess the question is, at this point, did Vladimir Putin properly set the stage to the Russian army, to the Russian military, about what its objectives are and what it was designed to do and what it was going to do inside of Ukraine before it kicked off said operation? I believe that in terms of setting the stage to the world and to the Russian population, I think from a historical context, Putin tried to explain what he was about to do. But that wasn't explained to the Russian army. And again, I think that had massive, massive ramifications about what we're seeing now. If we really had Russian combat battalions that had moved into Ukraine, not fully understanding that they were partaking in a military operation, that is a huge, huge problem. That is something that probably, if that was the case, if that actually occurred, and we have reason to believe it did, could in fact have cost the Russian military this campaign, if that was the case. Again, war is not just about moving unit designation markers across maps and looking at war on a map and again moving units around. It is a mindset. And your military formations that are going into war have to have that mindset, and they have to have an understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. If that's not the case, and your enemy fully understands what it is doing, you're going to lose. You're going to get your ass kicked. And unfortunately for the Russians, I think that is what we are seeing. I think we have Russian politicians that have the ability to look at history and then look at the future and then try to make decisions on what they have to do. But ultimately, the army, the military, the Russian military, probably wasn't mentally prepared for what it was about to undertake. And I don't know if the Russian military, the Russian intelligence service really believed that the Ukrainians were simply going to lay down and capitulate once Russian forces rolled into Ukraine. I mean, if that was something that they believed, I don't know how they would have believed that. What would have led to that decision-making process that Ukrainian forces would just lay down? If you go back to 2014 and you look at the Orange Revolution, you look at Maidan and what occurred there, you can see a very, very motivated populace that was looking for political change inside of Ukraine. And a lot of those folks that were especially in the battles that took place in and around the Maidan, that was incredible. And you could see the tenacity and perseverance in that group that was involved in the 2014 Maidan. And that's what led me early in as I watched the Russian military build up to believe that, look, this was not going to be a picnic for the Russians. The Ukrainians are not going to lay down. If you looked at what happened in Maidan Square, they were out there with BB guns and sticks and facing off against the Ukrainian Berkut that was still loyal to the government, and picking off a lot of those guys left and right and killing them in the hundreds. And they were still there. They were still fighting, again, with sticks. So the idea that they would just simply lay down and capitulate to a Russian military force that entered the country, they were way off the mark. And I don't know how they would have come to that decision, that thought process that would make them think that the Ukrainians would simply lay down, because they are not. And the Ukrainians believe adamantly that they are in a war, whereas the Russians are continuing this war in a special military operation to denazify Ukraine. Well, great, but if your army doesn't know that, and your army doesn't believe that, meaning the Russian army, then you're going to have a problem. And I think a case in point with that Eisenhower speech, Allied forces knew they were in for a fight. They knew that they were going to war. And I'm not sure the Russian military going into this knew that they were going into war, and it has cost them, and it has cost them quite a bit. I think the Russian military now understands that it's in a war. The Russian military does, but the political apparatus inside of Russia, the Kremlin, has not acknowledged that. And this is serious, serious business. And when you go to war, you have to go to war. And unfortunately for the Russian side, we're not seeing that. We're seeing war, we're seeing aspects of war, but it's limited war. And Ukraine is not Chechnya. Ukraine is not Estonia. Ukraine is not like Kazakhstan. Okay, Ukraine is a industrialized nation with 44 million people that happen to have very, very close allies with the West who are willing to supply them with real-time intelligence and advanced weaponry, more advanced weaponry than what the Russians possess. So going into that, I just don't know how you, if you were Russia, how you can just call this a special military operation, kind of tie one hand behind your back and hope for the best. And I think that's what's happened. And case example, I think this is going to be a case example where a half-hearted endeavor is probably or could lead to a unsuccessful endeavor in terms of what the Russians were trying to do in this ongoing war. And not a military operation, it is a war. Russia is at war. Now, Russia isn't completely treating it like a all-out war, whereas the Ukrainians are. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you, the viewer, understands kind of where I'm coming from, and I think it's a great example where you have the political controllers of a country, and that means Vladimir Putin, that means Shoigu, that means all of those in charge did not properly set the stage to the military and allow the military maybe what it needed to do. It didn't do that. And furthermore, given the size of Ukraine, 44 million people, one of the largest militaries in Europe, had a bigger military, standing army than France, Germany, or any European power, more tanks, more armored fighting vehicles, a very robust air defense system, with a very large segment of society that was willing to fight. And if you don't go into that 100%, then and your adversary is going into this 100%, meaning the Ukrainians have mobilized. They're treating this as a war for their very existence, whereas Russia not so much. So can Russia win in the end game without fully mobilizing? That's why I've talked about this before. I don't think so. I think with what the Russian initial objectives were, that they just weren't properly prepared. And I think the calling it a special military operation and trying to kind of downplay what was happening was ultimately at the expense of the Russian military. And I think it's paying the price now, and it will probably continue to pay the price until Russia, fully accepts that it is in a war right now. And you just look at this recent Ukrainian operation near Kharkov, east of Kharkov. I mean, you see columns of NATO-equipped Ukrainian units with armored fighting vehicles supplied by the West to Ukraine. I mean, some of these units rolling down southeast of Kharkov look like a NATO armed force. And you're not going to do well calling it a special military operation and then fighting the war one hand tied behind your back. You're just not going to do that. And I think that's what's happened. And ultimately, will the Russians adapt to what's happening on the ground and fully realize what they need to do in order to win this? I don't know. Is it too late? Has the level of casualties that the Russian forces took in the ongoing campaign exceeded what the loss rate would be for the Russian forces to continue the campaign? Possibly. I mean, when I look at anecdotal video clips of the equipment that was captured in the ongoing campaign near Kharkov by the Ukrainians, a lot of those Russian units just vacated the AO, man. They took off, left all their equipment there, and we've seen some of that to a lesser extent other areas as well. So not a good look if you're the Russian military. And obviously there's a lot of other issues going on as well in terms of the logistics issues within the Russian military, but not just the logistics issues. I think some of the equipment that has been supplied to the Russian military, it's just, they're using stuff from the Soviet times that and as are the Ukrainians. I mean, again, the Ukrainians are using a lot of the same equipment that the Russians are, but the motivation is just so much higher for the Ukrainians than the Russians, and it's really having an impact in this campaign, in this war. And but we'll have to see how things go. It doesn't look like the Russians are willing to call this off, and again, as I talked about before, the possibility of escalation is omnipresent. And if you have nuclear weapons, there's been no case in history where humanity has not used weapons that it possessed. And obviously, during World War II, they were used. The United States used them twice against Japan. So to say that the Russians won't use nuclear weapons, I think you're fooling yourself. But again, we'll see what happens. But again, that's it for today. We'll have more as we continue to analyze this conflict and look at what's happening inside of the conflict. And as always, thanks for joining us. More to come. Have a good day.